That's better.
All right, stopping your video here for a second. I'm going to start mine. And do this. Okay. Kendall, we'll get started. I'm sure Arodi will join in with us.
Okay.
So let me turn you back on. Start your. Oh, you got to start your video. I gave you permission to do that again.
Okay.
So start your video when you're ready. Excelente. Thank you very much. Well, friends, thank you for joining us again, whether you're watching live with us or you are watching this later as we record this in a fashion where it makes it easy for you to watch with friends, to have discussions later. For those of you who haven't joined us yet, my name is Jason Rowinski. I am the executive director of Reaching Our City, the senior pastor at Rock Church. And tonight I should be joined by our my co-pastor friend, Arodi Sanchez. Oh, there he is. He's coming on. Perfect timing. Um, Arodi is with us again and in
There we
discussion
go.
time for tonight. And we are joined by our friend, really Arodi's friend. He introduced me to Kendall not too long ago after he got here to Reaching Our City. But Kendall Hughes is a missionary, a former missionary, pastor, and longtime prison chaplain who now is working on his nonprofit called Restorative Justice in outside in Minneapolis. I'm sorry, in Minnesota and Rochester, not too far away from Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So tonight we're talking about the movie The House I Live In, which the guys will do a lot better of talking about and describing than I will. I'll give them some prompts maybe throughout, but they'll similarly just have a discussion about this movie, this documentary. It deals with our prison system on some levels. It also, I mean, really addresses the failed war on drugs and really the whole approach of maybe that Kendall can really speak to for us tonight is about the difference between punitive justice and restorative justice. And I think that this documentary kind of hints at that. It really hits at that a lot. And so, Kendall, thank you for joining us, and we're excited to have this conversation tonight. I want to hear Arodi and you together about what your feelings are about this movie. For those of you who again are really new to this, we kind of go through four modes of questioning. They frame the conversation. The first one is just our experience. Uh, what's a gut reaction? What do we feel? And part of the reason why we picked films are because they evoke something in us and they're relatable on a more human and emotional level than books are, at least at first. So we talk about those questions. Then we transition into reason. We start thinking about how does this translate into our real world? What else do I see going on that connects to broader issues? We start connecting dots. And then we ask the scriptural question about what does the Bible say about justice in this area? What does it mean for us to proclaim and live the gospel? How does Jesus and his message and his kingdom speak to this issue? And then we talk about tradition or the church, tradition, past, present, and future. How has the church dealt with this maybe in the past? And what are some ways that the church can deal with it, take action on this issue now? And so I'm going to turn off my video now. And I just want to say again, Kendall, thank you for being here and taking the time to do this. And Arodi, as always, for being so willing to do this. But I want to hear from you guys about this documentary. And when you think about it, watching it, hearing about it, addressing the things that it addresses, what's your gut reaction? What does it make you feel? What does it make you think of when you're just going to react to it? So, thank you for that. I'm going to bow out so they can see just you two talking. But go ahead and discuss that.
Well, uh, You ready? You wanna start off with your gut reaction, and I'll go in with mine.
Of course, boy. I would say the feelings that I was sensing as I was watching uh, this documentary were feelings of anger and despair. Uh, uh, the documentary didn't necessarily portray some of the information. I have heard of it before and I have been aware, but they did such a good job zooming in and zooming out of how it touches the lives of people that were so close to the producer, and how it's an issue that is at large. And I think I was more stressed and disappointed, I would say, on the fact that this is something that has been just like a pattern historically in this wonderful country of the United States of America, a country that, as an immigrant, I came here with this idea of freedom and equality and justice for all, and it was so just it was it was tough to see that this is nothing new. It's something that has been going on for almost 200 years, and that to me was disappointing, very disappointing on this country that I have learned to love and respect, and I have valued, and I love many great things about this country. But to see that we have continued to do the same thing for well over 100 years, it's just it's very disappointing.
And the best way I could describe it, I would really say, first of all, the word anger definitely came up with as an emotion for me. It's a complex emotion, and I need to describe it in an analogy. I saw something on the news yesterday that some people on a deserted island, or they had been wrecked, that they actually got saved. You see it in the movies, but they put a SOS in the sand, and a plane flew over and saw, oh my God, there's some people on that deserted island, and they came and they rescued them. And if you can imagine, what that would feel like to know that you and some people you love are stranded on this island and nobody seems to be paying attention. You're lost out on this island and you're desperate for help. I would like to put, when I see that movie and when I have over the last 20 years experienced what that movie portrayed, let me just say that movie was very accurate on how devastating our current system is on the people who are caught in the jaws of the system and the people who are agents of that system, what it does to them, how it portrayed what it does to the police, what it does to the correctional officers, what it does to the judges, and the people who are caught in the system and their families. So instead of an SOS, I have a feeling, having been in prisons for 20 years, that I need to put into the sand SOS. And that is, tell the world, stop our system of suffering. Stop our system of suffering. And as I said in the movie, and it's true, people don't know what's going on. When they were asking people don't really understand what's happening in the prisons. They don't understand what's happening with our justice system. When you work inside of it, you see what it's doing to your coworkers, the high suicide rate, the high violence rate among people who are caught up in law enforcement, the high addiction rate, what it's doing to the people who are arrested, the indignity, the shaming, the strip searches, the violence to their persons. And what happened with George Floyd, I've seen that. I've seen that same kind of thing in federal prisons, and those federal prisoners are supposed to be the best, the best trained, the most educated, the best paid staff, and yet that happens in a variety of ways. That's happening in prisons what happened to Mr. Floyd is happening in prisons across our country on a regular basis. When you see that that's going on, and there's been a great, rightfully so, great outcry. And I've stood right there where he was killed and seen the people, and there should be an outcry. And at the same time, I was thinking, what people don't know is that we're doing violence of that same magnitude on a massive scale every day through our prison system, the way that lives are destroyed. And just as Mr. Floyd's family and the family of all those who've been killed in police brutality, as those families are traumatized, we'll never get over that. The families of people who are incarcerated are traumatized. Children, their parents may go to prison for a set period of time, but the child is sentenced to a life sentence of having a parent who was in prison and who was ripped away from them at a crucial time in their life, and they never get over that. So I guess my feeling would be like that of someone who knows that people they love are on a deserted island and no one seems to care. No one seems to be doing anything about it. And we could change this. What we saw in the movie is an injustice that you and I are doing. There's a lot of injustices in our world that are someone else is doing, a dictator somewhere is doing, or that cancer causes, or that someone causes a harm. And we want to stop those, and we should be concerned about those. At the same time, when you yourself are a part of making an evil happen, you got to stop that. And we pay for the justice system. We elect the officials. They are agents of the American people, and we are causing tremendous violence, tremendous harm, and we're making the problems worse. So people get tired of me talking, but I'm kind of, I guess I feel very passionate about we've got to stop this. We've got to get the word out.
The thing is, when we're watching this documentary, I've known you all these years, and but in watching this documentary, I have even better insight in what you have always been talking about, what you've been passionate about, and the destruction that it causes to our country. I was something that I felt was fatigue. I watched this documentary that was 1 hour and 48 minutes, and I was tired. I was tired because I'm empathizing with Nani, the lady that took care of him. I'm empathizing with the officer, with the federal, with the prison jailer he seemed exhausted. The police officers that they're presented over there in Providence, they seem exhausted. The people inside, they seem exhausted. The federal judge, he seemed tired and exhausted. Everybody was just tired. It's like this never-ending loop of crime and punishment, crime and unfair punishment, mind you, very unfair punishment. And this punishment, and one of them said, we are punishing them not because what they have done, but because we're mad at them. It's because we're mad at them. We're angry at them, right? And we're afraid of them, and we're angry at them. That's what we're, and that's not fair. And I watched it for 1 hour and 48 minutes, and I was tired. So how do you feel like you lived this for 21 years? How do you combat that? As we go to question number 2 on how have you experienced this? How do you combat that experience? Like, I mean, I was tired and now we're 48 minutes in. You lived that for 21 years. So how do you do that?
Every day before as I'd walk into the prison, and I spent most of my time at the high security penitentiary in Leavenworth, and there's a series of 27 stairs going up to that prison. And every day before I'd walk up, and as I'd walk up those prayers, I would pray, God, use me in some way to make fewer victims, and victims all around. So I think I went in with a mission and with a passion, with a why, and the things that I saw in there and experienced firsthand in there, and the violence, it was like walking into a dark cloud every day. It's a very evil, oppressive place where violence is the norm, is the way that's what the rules. When you go in behind that concertina wire and the gun towers and all of that, it screams violence. It's a frightening, intimidating place. And so you have to have a passion. You have to have a why. You can endure anyhow if you have a why. And so, but the poor folks that work in the criminal justice system who don't do it with a passion, but they just do it for the money or for a job, it eats them up. It steals their soul. And I've seen people start off with good intentions, but it burns them out very quickly. So you're right on that. The people that can make it through a career in criminal justice and not turn out like a Derek Chauvin are the people who do it with a passion to make things better. And there's plenty that needs to be improved. And there are good people. Now, don't get me wrong. In all that I talked about the system, there are some very good people in there. You guys watched that movie, Just Mercy. I know you talked about that, and you remember the prison guard, and that's a true story. The prison guard who mistreated the attorney, who mistreated Brian Stevenson at first. And if you saw over the course of the movie how he became more compassionate in the book, you see he really did become compassionate. So there are good people that try to do the right thing in the system, but you have to have that heart and to continue to see these people who are being dehumanized by the system, to see them as human beings and to treat them that way.
Something that I've also felt was also a sense of, I guess I was grieving the fact that it was almost that nobody won in this thing. There's no real winners. Even those who are profiting from the prison and incarceration business, at the end of the day, they will be losers too, because society is crumbling. And I thought also of this of the analogy, the story of the blind man that touched an elephant.
Yeah.
Right. One group thought, oh, an elephant is like a tree. The other, an elephant is like a snake, or an elephant is like a spear, or like a rope, or an elephant is like a big wall. They said, but none of them had it right because there's a bigger reality. It seems to me that all these different parts in the system, prison, police officers, and the folks in the community, they're all different parts. And it's almost like they don't see how it's making a harm as a whole. In reality, it's this, the attorneys and the police officers, and many of them in their own world, they're doing the right thing. But when you put it together, it's not, you are destroying each other. And it is just mind blowing.
And that's the essence. That's the essence of how evil happens on a societal level. Is that each person that's committing a part of the evil on a societal level says, "I'm just doing my part. I'm just doing what I'm told to do. It's what has to be done. I'm following orders." And they're just doing their job, and the people don't stop and say, "But wait a minute, I need to be a voice because this whole thing is wrong." And so it takes people to speak out, and making movies like this are a step. There's an awareness. There are voices. There are a lot of voices. We a little over a year and a half ago got a law passed called the First Step Act, and that helped begin in a tiny way to begin to reform the federal prison system where I worked. And it's incremental. But if you look at how many different organizations and groups and voices worked together to make that happen, there was over 100 different organizations that came and pushed to finally get that law passed, and it took them years to get it done. They started back under the Obama presidency trying to just make a tiny reform in the federal prison system. So, there are some who are seeing the bigger picture and are trying to speak out, but there needs to be a lot more. The wave is starting. I believe movies like this and Just Mercy and others that are the program 13th and those on the 13th Amendment, the book New Jim Crow. There's another book that just came out recently, Until We Reckon, and there's actually a lot of books. It's starting. It's starting. But we need to get more people on board the wave.
Absolutely, and something that, as we talk, how we have experienced this in our lives. Obviously, you have experienced it very directly as a chaplain. I experienced it. I've experienced it as a pastor, as a youth pastor, and seeing how those who have been addicted to these substances, how they don't need to be what they don't need is to be locked up. That
Mm,
it
right.
is literally the issue.
Right.
Something that I impacted me. One of the guy that was a psychologist in the documentary, he said, we keep asking why the addiction, but we should be asking why the pain.
Right.
And what I'm
Absolutely.
seeing is a lot of pain.
Right.
That I dealt with. I was helping a man in my previous ministry, and I took him to to court for 2.5 years, and things weren't resolved. For 2.5 years, I would have to take him to court 45 minutes away. Sometimes he wouldn't know. He would know the day off. They wouldn't let him know because he couldn't afford an attorney. So he had a public defendant who was not on top of things, and I saw this man just being hopeless, just
Hmm.
being hopeless, and
Right.
it was a man with carrying a lot of pain in his life, a lot
Right.
of pain,
Yeah.
and he didn't want to be an addict. He didn't want to. He didn't. He regretted the things that he had done while he was under the influence, but
Hmm.
nobody really addressed the question why the pain in this man,
Right. Right.
and that's how I have experienced this. I've experienced the pain that those people who are suffering, um, and they don't, they, for one way or another, they don't find the hope in Jesus that we have, or they didn't have the role models in their lives, and they end up making mistakes. And man, it's terrible. It's a terrible
Right.
thing.
Right.
So the pain
Absolutely. And
is
yeah, you're moving into the next two areas. And that's I think that's key of our questions here, which is what is the reasons behind this, and then what does the scripture and the church have to say about this? And that's absolutely right. There was one guy who said, in addition to the psychologist, there's another guy who said it, that treating the crime, just incarcerating the person who committed the crime, is like looking at pneumonia and saying, well, we're going to treat the coughing. We're going to, this guy is coughing a lot, so let's stop his coughing, but he's got pneumonia. The addiction and the pain that the people who cause harm are acting out of is the root. And if we really want to have a safer country, if we want to have fewer crime victims, and we have one of the more violent countries of any of the industrialized or NATO countries, our crime rates are far higher. We're incarcerating 10 times as many, and yet our violence rates are 5 to 6 times as high as the other countries who incarcerate far a tenth of what we incarcerate, because what they do in those countries is they do more to deal with the underlying causes. We're just dealing with one symptom, which is that hurting people hurt people, and hurting people go to drugs or go to any kind of an addiction. So I think a key thing here to understand is interesting. I did not know. One thing I learned from the movie was that Nixon initially, after he kicked off this whole quote unquote war on drugs and law and order society and all this, that at first he was honest. He said, we need to treat the addict. We need to treat the addiction and the pain, that people don't use drugs unless they're in pain. But then he saw wow, I can get a lot of votes by being tough on crime, and all of his successors, Reagan and Clinton. It's not just one party. Both parties were guilty of it up until Obama, who gratefully began to turn things around. But they saw, wow, we can get all this power from throwing the book at people, and the prison industrial complex was supporting them. But going back to so they got off track, but Nixon, he saw it. He at first he even saw it. He said, we get more effects by treating the addict. And we got off track here in our country because of the power that came from these draconian laws for the politicians, and then it fed the prison industrial complex. So yeah, I think that in a sense that to be human is to have proclivity towards addiction. When you have pain, when you have suffering, your brain looks for something to help you feel better. And whatever that might be, then your brain gets wired towards that. And we're all like that. And we may not be a substance, but there's what they call process addictions. And in Celebrate Recovery, they talk about hurts, habits, and hangups. And when we have hurts in our life, then we form usually unhealthy habits to deal with it. And that's what's happening. And we have to address that root issue of the pain. And yeah, the men that I dealt with, and I only dealt with men in prison. We have way too many women in prison too, but those men, almost all of them, I would say 90% of them had almost no relationship with their fathers. They had traumas, and I would talk to them over and over again. In their adolescence and around the time they began down their path of crime, something happened. There was a death, there was a divorce, there was some kind of trauma in their life. They didn't know how to deal with that, and they started down making poor choices. And it's getting back to that pain. And then there are some people who have been born into families like this. That's all that they know. So how are we supposed to keep them from going to addiction when all these root drivers are there? That's, I think, where the call of the gospel and the call of the church comes in to deal with the things that drive people to act out on their addictions.
Hey, I think you mentioned something a lot when you mentioned the word power. I think our responsibility that we have is to unmask those powers that people are leaning to and trying to seek. So what power are they trying to attain when they're trying to give sustainability to such a system that is so destructive? We have to. What power, Kendall, do you think is going on? What are these politicians? What are these police officers seeking? What are these communities seeking? What is the power that they're seeking to attain and sustain? That they are fighting to continue to perpetuate the system that doesn't work. What are
Right.
what is it that they gain out of it?
Right. Well, and that again is a voice that we need to have, because it's a power of the empire. It's to bring people into conformity with their system, with what favors them. And in America, our original sin was that the white male-dominated culture built a system that oppressed people of color, that oppressed others for our wealth and our strength and our position. And so part of what has happened is carried forth is the whole racial inequity, which the movie brought out very well. If you go back to slavery, which kept people in power and kept people with wealth, and then when slavery was abolished in the 13th Amendment, and one amendment, people of color went from being slaves to being prisoners. And and today, to have the starting with Nixon, the term felon carried all of this negative baggage with it. And so felon is what I call the F word now. And so we've replaced the N word with the F word. And there are in the large urban areas in America, often 1 out of 3 men of color have been in prison or are involved in the justice system, and the inequity of policing and profiling and pulling them over. And then the whole, as the movie brought out, the crack disparity. I have sat, I'm brokenhearted looking at young men younger than you, Rhodey, and almost always men of color, not always, but almost always men of color, sitting in my office doing life sentences, who would never get out of prison and had not committed a violent act. And we were not afraid of them. They were not having, any violence against anybody. We were mad at them because they had broken a law. But, our prisons are full of people that our system benefits from keeping them down, just as it has from the beginning. And we heard the politicians in there saying those people are the threat, those people, and Reagan's political ads would always have, the welfare queen and the young man who was out of power, out of control with anger as a person of color, and so there's keeping the social system in place is part of it. You saw one of the most disturbing scenes in the movie for me, and to answer your question of the power, was the convention, the correctional convention, and that was, I don't know if you can see what it was ACA, which is the American Correctional Association, and I actually attended one of those to give a presentation on restorative justice there and try to have a positive influence. But it's big business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and some of the best stocks on Wall Street are for the private prison corporations. They interviewed a guy from that in Geocor and Correctional Corporation of America and Wackenhut. They make billions of dollars off of incarcerating people. And so yeah, there is an empire. Jesus fought the empire, the religious empire, the political empire. And I think that's our call, is that we have to stand up against the empire. And unfortunately, too much of evangelicalism has fallen in with that, with the empire, instead of we need to be the voice of Christ, which is the voice opposing an empire that is creating suffering, a system of suffering.
And it's the new Baal worship, meaning it's the new worship of the material. Racism, the war on drugs, which is basically a war on race and on class, right? As he portrayed it, opium wasn't seen in the antebellum South as something evil, but something that poor people, they are with opium, and then they wanted to get rid of the Asian folks and they associated it with opium. Then they wanted to get rid of the Mexican folks, associated it. All of a sudden, cannabis became marijuana, and they wanted to get rid of or push away and redline and blocked off the black folks, and then associated it with crack. Now it has evolved to a level not just of color, because obviously they have suppressed the people of color to class. Now it's a class, it's a suppression of class as well, but it affects also white people, as they said, especially now with methamphetamines. So
yeah, that's right.
Here's the crazy thing. It is this Baal-like worship. Like I need to speak for myself. I need to grab as much power as I can, because the material is all that matters. What is here, the power that I have, the money that I make is all that matters. So we have built all this system and all this society and all this financial structure on this Baal-like worshiping the material, worshiping the power to have money and influence and control of society. And it's completely an atheist, evil, satanic system. And that is what blows my mind. And so when we rely on this kind of system, and when we support this kind of system, we are basically saying God doesn't have the power to have enough provision. We are saying we're going back to the Garden of Eden and saying, only if I would know as much as God, if I would have a little bit, right? We are having this greed and this same desire from the very moment in the garden with the first man and woman. So it just blows my mind how, in a sense, is this pattern is there. It's been there all the time. It's just in a new form and shape. But we need to open our eyes and recognize it. It's right there. And it's Baal-like worship.
Right. Yeah. The one thing they said in the movie, I think it was the correctional officer said that maybe the system's doing what it's designed to do. After George Floyd was killed, I said something to a man of color who is now head of a large reentry program, but he had been incarcerated at one point in his life. And I said, boy, the system sure is broken. And he said, Kendall, maybe it's not. He said, maybe it's doing what it was designed to do. And, maybe there are some people intentionally who thought that it was going to reform or help people, but over the years, that idea has been dispelled. It does not work. It's a broken system if you look at it being a deterrent to crime. It's not. We have one of the more violent societies that there is in of all the NATO countries. We're far more violent. It's not a deterrent, and people don't think about the consequences often before they commit an act. It doesn't slow down people. Punishment only stops people while the punishment is in place. When you lift it off, they often return to that, and it doesn't go about really helping the victims either. Often the victims will say that they still don't feel safe because it doesn't address the underlying issues. So it's not working. And Rody, the children, there are over close to 3 million children right now in our country who've had a parent pulled away from them, ripped away from them, who they've seen their parents laying face down with their hands cuffed behind them and ripped away, and they're screaming, and they don't know what happens to them now, and their parents are gone, and to try to stay in touch with their moms and dads in prison, it's devastating. They never get over that trauma. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, maybe some of your listeners have had it happen, but could you imagine your parents being locked up and taken away from you and the uncertainty, and then they become 5 times as likely to become involved in the justice system, and their grades go down, their health goes down, they're much more likely to be abused themselves. The trauma that we're causing. We know that our current system does that, and yet we keep on doing it. And like we saw in that movie, that American Correctional Association, there's big bucks. There's all those people that come together, and there's big bucks that go into locking people up. And we build the prisons, and we want to keep them. We want to keep them full. The private prisons, they won't build a prison unless the government entity that is having the guarantees them that they'll have 70 to 90% of their beds full. And so they got to fill the beds, or they're in breach of contract. And so it's a system that you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a devious suffering at the heart of it. There's a violence at the heart of it that is anti-Christian. It's anti-God to cause my profit on the backs of someone else is evil. And we pay for that. We support that. We elect government officials. What can we do about it? We need to be aware of how our officials vote on that and make that a key issue. I look at anybody I vote for. I look at where do they stand on reforming the justice system. It used to be one of our criteria, and they need to know it. Yeah.
It must be a criteria that we all have to examine and look into closely. And as I looked, again, the guy that is the prison guard has so much amazing insights.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about how they keep building, and it keeps getting full. He said we consider them enemies to just find more enemies. You make more enemies out of them.
Right.
So that took me to think about what Jesus says about our enemies. How does the gospel treat enemies? How does the gospel call us to treat our enemies? Even if these folks were the enemies of society, the gospel calls us to love our enemies, to pray for them. And so as believers, even those who are on death row, even those who are considered a threat to society, Jesus calls us to love them, pray for them. So if you love your enemies, you are more likely to have less enemies. So that to me is what the gospel speaks very hard against it. How we see those folks, they're enemies, but even if they're enemies, we gotta love them. Even if they're enemies, we gotta pray for them. Even if they're enemies, even if they're oppressing us, just if they that turn the other cheek, walk the extra mile. Even when they are people, this is the gospel in a nutshell, and it's how this the paradoxical nature of the gospel. We don't, you don't make peace with friends. Jesus says even the Pharisees do that. Anybody can do that. Even those who don't even believe in God get along with their friends. You need to seek peace with those who are your enemies, who those who
Right.
maybe consider your enemies, who hate you. And I think that's where the gospel speaks really loudly
Right.
against this aspect of, well, they're enemies, they need to be locked up, we're afraid
Mhm.
of them, we are mad at them, and we
Mhm.
gotta punish them just because we're
Right.
mad at them.
Right.
So that's what I see the gospel. What else do you see the gospel fitting in into
Absolutely. Well, whenever Jesus encountered somebody who had broken the laws of those days, you never see him talking about punishing them. You see him restoring those people. You have Zacchaeus, who would be what we call today a white-collar criminal, who was, embezzling money. And Jesus said, "I'm going to your house today." Now, he called him to restore, to pay back the harm he caused, but he called him by name, and he brought him in. The woman who had been caught in adultery, which at that time was a crime. I don't know where the man was, but she was by law, it was guilty of capital punishment. And he said, "Where are your accusers?" He said, "Those who are without sin cast the first stone," and he restored her. He restored her. The last thing he did on this earth was he spoke to a man condemned to die, a man being executed, and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." He built relationships with people. He restored people. He was not about punishment. Even the centurion, who you could say was his enemy, who had just crucified him, there was something about how Jesus carried himself and the love and the compassion he had. This man said, "This man surely is the Son of God." That he built relationships and inspired people to do the right thing, and that's what changes people. And being a corrupt tax collector, we don't want that. Jesus didn't want that, but he knew that punishing Zacchaeus wasn't the answer. It was restoring him and inspiring him to do the right thing. That's far more powerful. Anything that you have to use violence, get no mistake about it, our system uses violence against people who they arrest. If you have to use violence, it's not going to change their heart. If anything, it makes them feel like a victim, and it just makes them feel sorry for themselves, and it doesn't do a heart change. It might make them afraid for a while, but it doesn't change their heart. It's a restorative practice that Jesus had that is going to change people's hearts and inspire them. The people like Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, they all had that nonviolent response. Yes, you confront evil, and yes, you name evil, and you confront it, and you stand up to it, but you do it in a compassionate way. The people who cause harm need to be held accountable. They truly need to be held accountable for what the harm they've caused. But being put in a prison cell is not really holding someone accountable. That's just telling you to go sit in this prison cell for this time. They may never really confront the harm they did. I saw that in the penitentiary. Guys who had served decades in prison who had never even thought about, in any kind of depth, the person they had hurt. And then we brought in crime victims and we did restorative justice with them. And they sat and they looked at a person who had suffered a violent crime like they had committed. It was very hard. These guys who would never shed a tear were shaking, were crying. And they're like, "I never thought about the people I harmed. I never want to do that again." And we restored them. We gave them dignity. We gave them a chance to, in the way they had diminished their relationship with their community by committing harm. We gave them a chance to rebuild their relationship with the community by doing right and by doing community service and by changing their lives, and restored them to their community. That's what changes people. That's what holds people accountable. Is to face the harm you caused to this person, make it right. The way you diminish yourself with the community, rebuild yourself with the community by doing good. And when the community finally says, we see you've changed, and bring them back in. When Zacchaeus had paid all that money back, I imagine that maybe he was restored to community. And that's the alternative that works and is working in many countries and is working in our country in a number of places. They're using restorative justice, a method based on the life of Jesus.
Absolutely. And the story of Zacchaeus is right on.
Yeah.
Jesus calls him by name, sits down and eats with him, treats him like a person. I imagine Zacchaeus, people didn't want anything to do with him, and the fact that he was short and all that. But I think bringing back that dignity, bringing back that worth. Jesus says, "For this man too is a son of Abraham." Right?
Yep, that's
Jesus.
right.
So what Jesus does is he connects this man to the community back again. He
Mm-hmm.
reminds the community this man is not alone. This man is a human being. This
Right,
man is one of us. And
right.
I think we need to continue to talk in these terms of inclusiveness, right? In these terms
Mm-hmm.
of when we talked about this us versus them
Right,
kind of a thing, that the divide is huge. The
right.
divide is
Yeah.
we need to those people out there, and those people are hurting. You saw one of those politicians saying those people are hurting our families. Those people are doing this. Those people are doing that. No,
Mm-hmm.
they're not those people. They're our people.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
not those kids.
Right,
They're our kids.
right.
They're,
Yeah.
those kids that are being left behind are
Mm-hmm.
not just the kid of somebody of they're not just the kid of somebody that was a drug addict or a drug dealer. They're
Mm-hmm.
now our kids. We need to
Mm-hmm.
assume that responsibility. They are one of us. They
Mm-hmm.
are part of our community. They are part of our country.
Right, right,
They are obviously children of God. They
right.
belong. They belong to this earth. They have something good to give. They have something
Mm-hmm.
good to offer, and
Mm-hmm.
I think and I think that's Jesus did that with the man that was also the demon possessed guy. He said, "Go and tell the wonderful things that you have done." He went and gave his testimony as well. So it's this restoration, believing that not only this person has worth and value intrinsically, but also has a lot of potential,
Right.
has
Oh, they
great
do.
potential to
They
give
do.
something amazing. And you have great stories of great
Mm-hmm.
guys that have been there released from prison after who
Mm-hmm.
knows how many years, and
Mm-hmm.
now they are tremendous members of society, business owners,
Right,
pastors. They
right.
are advocates. They are doing amazing things. People that many of them are artists. Many of them
Mm-hmm.
are people with
Mm-hmm.
amazing abilities that were never they were the people. Nobody never nurtured them. Nobody never believed in them. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something that we gotta see. There is
Mm-hmm.
potential in each and every one of the children of God. Each and every one of them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. The thing that prison volunteers, when they start, will tell me consistently, I had no idea what beauty and what resources and what richness there were in the people behind bars because we've made it into an us and them. They must be evil. They must be monsters. That's why we've got to lock them up. And as you said, they're poets, they're artists, they're creators, and when they get out, they're business owners. They have much to offer. If we give them an opportunity while they're maybe locked up, we don't need to be locking them up. But if we can give them the opportunity to get an education, an opportunity to get help with their addictions, to find healing for the pain in their lives, to have a meaningful economy in their lives, then they have tremendous creativity to offer. There's some brilliant, brilliant people behind bars. And the reality is that I would say, in my experience, 20 years and working in 4 different prisons, 80% of the people, and even working in the highest security prisons in our country, 80% of those people, we would not be more dangerous if we let them out. Now there is a percentage, there's a small percentage, and even the guys in prison know who those guys are, who are dangerous people that they may need to be restrained. But the vast majority of the people we have locked up in the United States, there are other means: restorative justice, home confinement, probation, community service, all kinds of things that we could do. What they're doing in the other NATO countries, in New Zealand, Australia, what they're doing there, versus locking up all of these people, ripping them away from their families, away from their children, and keeping this cycle going. I remember speaking to a hardened correctional officer, looking at the children coming in to visit their fathers in prison, and he's like, "There's my job security." He said that, looking at the kids, because the kids are struggling, and they're left without their fathers, and that cycle goes on. And we need the job of prison officials, prison guards, all of us, whoever worked in corrections, should be to work ourselves out of a job. We need to be helping these folks never come back to prison, help them get reintegrated to their families, help them understand the harm they cause, restore that harm, address the underlying issues, the addiction and the pain that they're suffering, the lack of economic opportunity, so that we work ourselves out of a job. Instead of what we have now is we have lobbyists for private corrections who are trying to get more stiff sentences to keep those prison beds full, which just perpetuates this. And the church has to respond to that. The church should be addressing the systemic evils of our society. Too often our churches deal with personal issues. People don't dare commit a crime or a sin until the society in some way is condoning it. And we need to address the societal ways that we condone violence, that we condone racism, that we condone, as you mentioned, greed and power and control, those kinds of things. It needs to be addressed on a societal issue and on a personal issue.
And so obviously, I believe that the church, every pastor should has the responsibility to condemn these things and be prophetic about condemning this evil in society is seen at the most grotesque level. We have this very, very silly idea that sin is just this individual thing that I do. Well, I have nothing to do with it, we say, right? And we have been talking about this consistently, this idea of how sin is not just personal, but it's also communal. It's also it's societal. It affects us all, and like you said, we even if we don't want to, somehow we find ourselves somehow participating in this situation, even when we are not aware of it. So that's why we need to be very mindful and very clear about how systemic sin, how it is rooted everywhere. It is everywhere we go. Wherever we touch with the money that we spend. And they talked about how there are communities, whole towns that completely rely on this unfair prison private systems. A whole town depends on that. And people say, well, if it shuts down, the town is gone. I'm like, well, no, let's find another way. I'm sure that town can do something else other than that survive out of this evil. So we need to be able to address that, and the church has a responsibility to confess these sins. And confession is a thing that we need to do more often in a communal way. We don't do it very often. We think it's just, again, this is just I confess my sins, my individual sins to God, and I have nothing else to do with anybody else. So I think that communal confession and confrontation of this the powers that be is something that we absolutely need in the church.
That's right. Yeah. And from the pulpits, from our classes that we teach, to do much less shaming people, much more seeing that people are acting out of addictions, and how do we heal that, and recognize that all of us in some way have tendencies towards addictions or to obsessive behaviors when we feel pain, things that we run to cover that pain, and how do we help people deal with their pain in a healthy way and not shame them, inspire them to live above those unhealthy coping mechanisms, those unhealthy addictions, and have unconditional love as they struggle with it. That's the best way to help heal somebody of an addiction. Locking them into a prison cell where they're shamed, where they're isolated, where their economic opportunities are taken away from them, and where they're surrounded by violence, that's a recipe for more violence. Treating people with love, giving them healing opportunities and connection, that heals that underlying pain that leads people to addiction. So the church can be instrumental in that. And so we need to be careful in our language of not shaming people for their behaviors, but having grace, for knowing that we all need grace. We've all sinned, and we all need to have grace towards people. I think that's a big part. Just educating people on the church, how we vote, there's things, just some simple things that right now are doable things. If we want to talk about practical things that we can do, right now we're pushing to try to restore Pell Grants for people that are in prison, so they can stay. They mentioned that in the movie that there are some good programs in the prisons, but quite often those get cut first. Like during COVID, the guys are all on lockdown. All programs are done in the prison. They're spending 24/7 locked in their little cells with no opportunities, and it's killing them. But we need to, if there were Pell Grants, then guys could be getting college educations, could be getting a job skill in there, and they're still American citizens. They still, there are still people that that deserve a chance to get education. Restoring the vote. There's a lot of states that are working on restoring the vote to give them a chance to vote, because right now, if you have a felony in many states, you can't vote. These are some of the things that we can be doing. There's a thing they talked about in the movie about that when you apply for a job, you have to check, do you have a felony or not? And there's a movement called Ban the Box that some states have passed, that you can't ask people about a felony. There's certain jobs where they may have to do a background check, but you don't put that as a barrier right away, because those job applications don't even get considered. So those are some things that we as Christians can advocate for. Those are some wins that we can get right now to help change the system.
Man, that is something that is so huge. Me working in the workforce here in Oklahoma, I've seen that a lot. Those folks who have had even a misdemeanor, they have a hard time finding employment. Imagine a felony, right?
Right.
So we need to be advocates of those folks, not only when they come and say, "Hey, it is so nice that you are here. I'm glad that you came to church," but actually taking a step forward, putting faith is action. We doing what we can do with our votes, doing what we can do with our resources, doing what we can do with an advocacy for them. When somebody comes, don't just say, "I'm glad you came to church and your soul has been saved." No, what can we do? What do you need at home? How's your transportation? What are the resources that you're lacking, and how can we truly support you and rally around you and cheer you on and hold you accountable and continue to push and say, hey, what a great thing, what a great we celebrate that you are free, and we want to make sure that you remain so, and that you have the dignity of the word that all of us do. I think the church completely needs to rally each and every one of us.
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Receive them and reintegrate them in society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to tell you about a little guy. His name was Ken Spring. His parents had passed away. He had no relatives. He had spent so much time in prison. He was afraid to get out of prison. He had no family. He was working very hard to try to change his thinking. But when he was about to get released from prison, previous to me knowing him, right before he was about to get released from prison, he wrote a threatening letter to a government official. No ability of carrying it out, but just so because he knew by doing that they'd keep him in prison longer, because he was afraid to get out of prison. And I worked with him. I said, "Ken, there's so many better opportunities for you on the outside." But he said, "I have nothing out there." He said, "At least in prison, I have friends. I have guys around me. I have a job inside of here. I got something I can do." But the good thing was we connected him with a church on the outside. And when he got out, that church took him under their wing, and he had not committed a violent crime. He didn't have a violent bone in his body, and did not put people in the church at risk. But they took him in. He ended up becoming their sound man, and that began. And as I've talked to him, he says, "I have a family now. This church is my family," and they loved him. He's there every time the choir practices, and he runs the sound, and they gave him a family. And I've heard story after story after story of people who previously their families were gangs and were bad associates, getting out, and their family becomes the church, and the church helps them in practical ways as well. That can be a key role of people returning there. In Oklahoma City, there's a lot of folks returning, to society. So how do we embrace them?
This is our moment, and we don't want to miss it. Right here in
Right.
Oklahoma, we have to take advantage, seize the moment,
Yeah.
and be the church that God has called us to be.
Right.
Well,
Right.
Kendall, we have talked for nearly an hour,
Yeah.
and it went by really fast.
Yeah, it did. It
You
did.
guys did a great job. There's a
It did.
lot there, a lot of practical handles, and a lot of reminding us of the gospel that is Jesus's own self-proclaimed mission statement thing is going to set the captives free, and it's so
Right.
essential to the biblical faith that
Right.
there's concern for the captives,
Right.
all
Yeah.
over the Bible.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Yeah. Old Testament and New Testament.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
so thank you for bringing that and the human side to it,
Sure.
and just your experience, Kendall, really was a big deal. You know what you talk about because you've lived it. You live it. You still do it. So thank you.
Hmm. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this and to get the word out.
Yeah, absolutely. Rody, any parting thoughts you wanna leave with us?
I am challenged today. I'm more challenged than I was ever before. Um, and personally, I will continue to. God has given us opportunity already to serve those rich in our city who have been previously incarcerated, and I'm so grateful for that. But I think we gotta do more, and I personally want to commit to do more,
Yeah.
and to be more, and to be present, and to be. I don't know. There's no other way other than being compassionate, being present, uh, and being an advocate for change. Uh, I just there's no other way forward, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for the awareness, and I want to I want to take action, and not just speak words, but I want to be a man of action for the Lord and for the kingdom.
Well, we talk about works of mercy and works of piety, and our internal faith and our external faith have got to be coherent. They've got to line up,
Right.
congruent. And,
Yeah.
that's why we do this work. It is part of the gospel, as you guys pointed out so effectively, um, but it's inside and outside matching, and our outside is not just thought of as my personal I'm a good person kind of things, which is important. Even the fruit of the spirit important, but it's very social. It's the social holiness that we hear Wesley proclaim. So thanks again. I'm going to stop the live stream here for a second, guys. You can hang on. We can chat for a moment after we hang up there. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope you continue to have these conversations where you're at. Find ways to address addiction, systemic injustice when it comes to sentencing, when it comes to way overuse of punitive so-called justice, and let's find ways to be the community that can turn this around. It's possible. A lot of this war on drugs and these other things, this is really just a generation-ish or so, maybe too old, in how much it's ramped up and how it's become really just an industry. So let's take another 40 years now and put our sights on it and turn it back around again and make this a better place for all of us to be renewed and to find our place in society and community, but also for those to find their hope and healing in Jesus Christ. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time.